Okay, so we're going to take a practice science test here together. But before we do, I have a couple of tips for you. Welcome to Purely Persistent. I'm Michelle. First tip, make sure that you watch the clock, okay? A lot of times people struggle with maybe reading a little bit too slowly and then they run out of time. So just be mindful of how you're doing on the time and try not to freak yourself out, okay? Follow the SQ3R reading technique. Oh my gosh, this is probably the most important thing on the reading test. First thing you have to do is survey, kind of see what's going on. Second, you want to question. Take a look at those questions or maybe create your own questions. These are going to help you pay more attention. Then read, recite is basically just kind of looking over, making sure that you answer the questions correctly. And then review is just when you're done with the whole thing, just kind of go through it. Now I have an older video on this, but give this video here a thumbs up if you'd like me to recreate my SQ3R reading video. And finally, you've got to practice, but that's why you're here, right? So make sure that you stay until the end of the video. Okay, reading test 2, and it's 2 because I've already done one, so make sure that you check it out. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we survey, which is to really help us to focus and to pay more attention. Okay, so I like to take a look at the top part that is in the bold. So we start off with this little bit right here. So in this adaptation from the opening of the historical novel by Henry Carstaill, a 17-year-old boy is returning from his first voyage on a whaling ship after 19 months at sea. And then, of course, you want to make sure you read the title, Excerpt from Jonah the Man. Okay, and now I'm going to read just a little bit. This here is literary. You can see there are a lot of quotes within it. So I'm just going to read a little bit here and there, just so that I get the general gist of what is going on. So, I was on board the Eliza Slade. That day was a proud one for me. No, sir. Ship again? Truly amazing. The captain shook his head in wonderment. Worse than I thought. Hopeless, I'd say. Then the captain eyed me narrowly and said, Captain Clasby studied me for a moment. At the time, the captain's question made no sense to me. My uncle, Hisiah, I don't know how to say that, met me at the wharf. Same, 19 months. Ship again? Yes, sir. Can't help that. My uncle was right about the farm at Pulpis. See, Tamar, if she hadn't heard him, my mother looked at me. My younger sister Susan was looking at me. It's pretty. Pearls next time. My mother looked at my father. Next time. In the days that followed, everything was the same except me. So we have a general idea here of what's going on. So it's a kid that was out at sea for quite a long time, and then he returned home. He had some encounters with the captain, and now he's visiting his family, and everything is the same except for him. So I want you to think about that for a minute. If you still live at home with your folks, probably everything is the same, right? That's just sort of what you've grown up with. But if you've lived away from your family for a little while, and then you move back and like you've changed, and they haven't, they're still the same. My parents are still the same as when I grew up. And so sort of keep that in mind, because if you can relate this story to you in some way, even if it has nothing to do with your life, that will help you focus and pay a little bit more attention. And that is the whole purpose of surveying, to help you be engaged, because sometimes whatever the reading is, you might have no interest, or maybe it's just boring. And so by being just a little bit more focused, it will help you pay better attention if you can sort of relate it. Okay, so that's the first thing we do. We survey, and now let's take a look at the questions. What is the major source of young Pollard's feeling of pride on the day Eliza Slade returned to port? Okay, the next one here about Captain Clasby, see how it says lines 20 to 21? You actually don't need to read that part when you're surveying, because clearly when you see that, you would go back and look at those, right? So I'm not going to take the time to read through ones like that. Which of these best describes how Captain Clasby is portrayed in the passage? This one here refers to specific lines. Pollard's mother had apparently predicted that he would probably return to sea, right? Based on kind of our surveying. So now we're going to take a little bit of time to actually read the story. So my picture is kind of hiding a little bit of it, but just read along with me, okay? I was on board the Eliza Slade, returning to the island on a blue, windy September afternoon in 1808. We had rounded Brant Point, and the town came into view. Okay, pause for a second. If you can picture this in your head as we are reading, kind of think about it like a movie, that is going to help you better understand what we're reading. Okay, so try to paint the picture in your head. That day was a proud one for me. Not 2 hours before, Mr. Bench, the mate of the Slade, standing with Captain Clasby on the afterdeck, had called me over to them, and the captain had growled, "Well, Pollard, I guess it's back to the potato patch for you now, eh?" "No, sir," I said. "No, sir?" he said in mock surprise. "I intend to ship on another whaling cruise." "Ship again? Did you hear what this young man just said, Mr. Bench?" "Truly amazing." The captain shook his head in wonderment. "You mean to tell me, Pollard, that with all this trouble the whales have given you, not to mention Mr. Bench, that you actually want to go whaling again?" "Yes, sir. I mean to spend my life at it." "Worse than I thought," said Clasby, "much worse." "Hopeless, I'd say," said Mr. Bench. The captain eyed me narrowly and said, "Well, then, in that case, I guess I got no choice but to recommend you for boat steerer your next voyage out. Course the say, so'll be your next skippers and the owners, but they'll have my view of the matter, and you can use it as you like." "Thank you, sir," I told him. "Thank you very much." Captain Clasby studied me for a moment. Then, still looking at me, said to the mate, "Reckon he'll always think I've done him such a favor, Mr. Bench." At the time, the captain's question made no sense to me. As we neared the anchorage, my gaze swept the town. I felt elated on the first homecoming, assured I had acquitted myself credibly, and all that I could see ahead on the bright September afternoon was clear sailing. My uncle Hezekiah met me at the wharf, the news of the arrival of the Eliza Slade having not yet reached my family in Pulpis, 6 miles up harbor from town. "How's everyone in Pulpis?" "Same, about the same." "How long you been out?" 19 months. "Be shipping again?" "Yes, sir. Your old man could use you handily on the farm." "Can't help that." My uncle was right about the farm at Pulpis. Everything was about the same there. Sheep bells tinkled, chickens squawked. My mother greeted me as if a ghost had returned from the dead. My father was pleased to see me. My safe return had settled an argument in his favor. "See you tomorrow?" he said that evening, poking at the fire in the kitchen hearth. "He's home in one piece." "What about all that gloomy predictions?" As if she hadn't heard him, my mother looked at me and said, "Glad you're home, son. Hope you'll stay a while. We need you here." My younger Susan was looking at me expectingly. I reached into my pocket and handed her a package. With delight, she opened it and looked at the amber necklace I had brought her in Valparaiso. "It's pretty," she said and kissed me on the cheek. "Pearls next time," I told her. My mother looked at my father. "Next time?" she said. In the days that followed, I helped with the harvest, feeling that everyone was blind to the changes that had happened in me. They were all still treating me as the pulpous farm boy I had been before I put to sea. Everything was the same, except me. So let's take a look at the questions here. So what is the major source of young Pollard's feeling of pride the day that Elsa Slade returned to port? Okay, so his feeling of pride, think pride, right? Seeing the family farm at Pulpus in the distance. Is that what making him feel proud? No, remember the family farm is like 6 miles north, right? The sight of his hometown after 19 months away. Is he proud because of that? No, not really, right? Relief that he had been able to survive the long, perilous voyage? Maybe. Let's look at the last one. Learning he had earned a recommendation for promotion. Guys, remember it said he's elated. Elated means like super excited, like above the moon. He's thrilled, right? That is why he's feeling proud, because he's excited to do it again and he just got a promotion. The exchange between Captain Clasby and Mr. Bench in lines 9 through 15 primarily reflects, so here we've got 9 through 15. So we've got right here, so let's kind of skim through it, just sort of remind us what we just read. So, ship again, do you hear what this young man just said? Truly amazing. The captain said in wonderment, "All the trouble the whales have given you. Yes, sir, I'm going to spend my life at it. Worse than I thought, much worse. Hopeless, I'd say." Okay, so are they at serious concern for the young man's welfare? Well, I mean, maybe, but like sort of near the end, it sort of shows a little bit of concern. But basically, they had a really rough voyage, right? And and the kid is saying, "Hey, I want to do it again," right? And so I don't think it's concern for his welfare. Okay, teasing of him. Are they kind of teasing him? A little bit. I mean, in their own way, right? Here it says here, truly amazing. Captain shook his his head. I mean, just if you can picture this image in your head, I mean, you can sort of see these guys kind of teasing him about that, right? So maybe B. Okay, C, sarcastic scorn of the sailors for a farm boy. Did they treat him like he's a farm boy? No, they're treating him like he's the sailor that has worked hard. He's just a young sailor, right? So they're not thinking of him like a farm boy. It's his family that is still thinking of him as just a farm boy. Mean-spirited ridicule of an inexperienced shipmate? No, because right after this, the captain gives him a promotion, right? So they're like, this is a great boy, and like, are you sure you want to do this with your life? You're so silly, that sort of thing. So it's definitely good humor that they're providing here. Captain Clasby's question in lines 20 through 21 seems to hint later in the story. So here we have, it's this little bit right here. So let's reread that. So Captain Clasby studied me for a moment, then, still looking at me, said to the mate, "Reckon he'll always think I've done him such a favor, Mr. Bench?" Right? So the plot will be primarily a humorous one. I mean, there's not really any humor in there, right? They were kind of teasing him a little bit earlier, but this is not, I mean, here he just promoted him. And then he's saying he's always going to think I did him a favor, right? So that's not it. The dark side? Is his dark side going to be revealed? Not really, right? That doesn't really have anything to do with this. Okay. Pollard will probably face tougher challenges at sea than he can imagine. Right? He will, right? I mean, he had a rough 19 months, right? But it's gonna get worse, right? So that's kind of what he's sort of prepping him for, right? He'll think I've always done him a favor, and then, oh my gosh, here's this like big storm. This was nothing, you know, it's Candyland, what you saw before. So that's the answer. But let's take a look at D also. The symbolic differences between life on land and sea will be the main theme. No, we're not really talking about theme. Okay. Which of these best describes how Captain Clasby is portrayed in the passage? So gruff but kind. Yeah, I mean, you can sort of see he's a little gruff, right? He's a whaler, and it's like the 1808 here, right? I mean, he's this rough whaler. So as you picture the image in your head, you know, kind of this gruff guy, right? But he's also really kind, and he kind of has taken little Jonah under his wing, not Jonah, Pollard under his wing, right? A competent but insensitive. He sounds like he's a nice guy, right? I mean, I wouldn't say that he's insensitive. Is he irresponsible? No. Humorless? No, guys, he was teasing. He was teasing young Pollard, right? So he's gruff, but he's kind and gentle, right? Pollard's mother apparently predicted that he would not survive the voyage. Guys, keep in mind here, like this one right here, see Tamar? He's home in one piece, right? Because his dad is saying he's home in one piece. That's alluding to the fact that Pollard's mom thought he was toast. He was not going to make it, right? So that's the answer. Okay, so this one just came from the HiSET Free Practice Test 6A. We're going to move on to another one though. Halfway through the video, give this a thumbs up, and that's going to show me that you're committed. So the next reading that we're doing here is actually broken into two different parts, okay? So it's talking a little bit about the history of women's basketball, but then it's going to have another article that relates to it. So there are two articles. So we'll read the first article, answer the questions on that first article, and read the second article, answer the questions on the second article, and then there are questions that relate to the first and second article and sort of how they sort of tie together. Okay, so let's start by surveying this. So we're going to read what's in bold, right? We read what stands out. The following nonfiction passage explains the history of women's basketball in the United States. Okay, women's basketball. So when we have paragraphs like this, when I survey, I like to basically just read like the first maybe half a line of each paragraph, just enough so that I get the gist of what's going on. Okay. Today, basketball is one of the most popular women's sports. The rules Burnson established for her female players. As women's basketball spread, the rules changed over the years. In 1958, the Office of Civil Rights began to consider banning. The 1970s were pivotal for women's basketball. Women's basketball continued to grow in the following decades. So now let's take a look at the questions. So the first paragraph is mostly about, we'll go back to the first paragraph and review that. Which sentence best describes women's basketball in the 1940s? How was 6-on-6 basketball different from 5-on-5 basketball? And how is the passage women's basketball organized? So again, by surveying and looking at the questions, it's just kind of helping us pay a little bit more attention when we are reading, and then we're going to be familiar with where the content is in case we have to go back to it. Okay, let's read. Women's basketball. Today, basketball is one of the most popular women's sports, both among athletes and fans. Basketball was invented by Dr. James Naismith and introduced to male athletes in 1891. Less than a year later, Sandra Berenson, a physical education instructor at a small women's college, decided the game would be a good alternative to the physical fitness activities offered to young women at the time. The rules Berenson's established for her female players differed from the men's rules. The rectangular playing floor was divided into 3 equal zones. Each team had 9 players, 3 forwards, 3 centers, and 3 guards. A player was restricted to her own zone on the court, could hold the ball for only 3 seconds, and could dribble only 3 times before passing. No stealing was allowed. As women's basketball spread, the sport faced some opposition, including criticism that too much physical exertion could be harmful to young women. Nonetheless, women's teams formed in high schools, colleges, businesses, recreation centers, and neighborhoods across the United States. By the 1940s, women's basketball had become the women's sport most frequently played at the high school level. Rules changed over the years. Some version of the high school game had a few rover players who were allowed to move more freely between the zones on the court. However, in many states, high school women played 6-on-6 basketball. This game had 2-section court with players restricted to the side of their court. All players were limited to 2 dribbles, and each team had 3 guards and 3 forwards. Only forwards were allowed to shoot the ball. In 1958, the Office of Civil Rights began to consider banning 6-on-6 high school basketball. It was believed that 6-on-6 players were at a disadvantage when competing for college athletic scholarships. The 6-on-6 game was viewed as not being sufficiently compatible with the women's college game, which by then had teams of 5 players with centers, forwards, and guards, all eligible to shoot the ball and run the entire length of the 2-section court. The 1970s were pivotal for women's basketball. The 5-on-5 format at the high school level gained broader acceptance. Also, Title IX passed in 1972. One consequence of this law requiring equal opportunity for women in all programs at public high schools and universities was that basketball eventually became the most frequently offered women's sport at the college level. Another highlight of the decade was that women's basketball became an official Olympic sport in 1976. Women's basketball continued to grow the following decades. During the 1981 to 1982 season, 32 teams took part in the first National Collegiate Athletic Association Championship Tournament for women. Current tournaments have twice as many teams. The Women's National Basketball Association, a professional league, debuted with 8 teams in 1996 through 97 and now has 12. With women's basketball continuing to garner so much attention and support from potential players and fans, the sport seems destined to thrive for years to come. Okay, so now we have the questions. So here we have the first paragraph is mostly about, so let's just kind of review the first paragraph, okay? So today, women's basketball is one of the most popular women's sports. Here, it was invented for males and then a year later for women. Okay, so it's mostly about early basketball coaches. No, it's about the it's about the origin of women's basketball, right? So definitely be there, right? The popularity of women's basketball today. No, health benefits. No, guys, the origin. This is where women's basketball came from, right? Which sentence best describes women's basketball in the 1940s? Okay, so one thing that is really important is to be able to scan through and see 1940. Okay, so right here, look, it says 1940. 40s. So, college players were recruited and drafted by professional teams. No, guys, it says here that it's, right, it goes on and says colleges, businesses, recreation centers, right? So it's kind of just a fun thing. It's not professional at this point, right? It's still fairly new. Restrictive rules kept the sport from growing. No, look, it's all over neighborhoods, businesses, recreation centers, right? College players began competing at the end of season tournaments. Not yet, guys, right? It's still just something fun that they're doing. Men and women played on organized and informally assembled teams. Yes, the sentence right before that I just underlined is talking about the informal teams. You know, they're just having fun, right? So D is definitely the answer. How was 6-on-6 basketball different from 5-on-5 basketball? So let's just review. Remember, it said in here that the 6-on-6 basketball, right, they kind of had like their own section, right? And the 5-on-5, they could go through the whole court. With the 6-on-6, only certain players could shoot the basket, and with the 5-on-5, anybody could, right? So that's kind of what it read in this paragraph right here, and then the one that's following it. So 6-on-6 was played on a 2-section court. No, they had it in 4 sections, right? Positions included guards and forwards. No, I mean, we're looking for what's different, right? 6-on-6 players remained in their own zone. Yes, they did that. 6-on-6 players dribbled more. No, they could only dribble 3 times, right? 1, 2, 3, and then they had to pass the ball, right? So the answer is definitely C. But this is the type of question, go back to the text and look it up. Or you surveyed it and you already were familiar with the question. That might be the time when you're sort of seeing the differences. Pay close attention because you know that question is coming up. Okay, how is the passage organized? So let's go through each one. It describes an event and several changes that resulted from it. So not an event, but it just really talked about the history of the basketball, right? So it's not that here. It recounts the events in order they occurred. Yeah, right? So in the late 1800s, it was invented. And then this happened. And then this happened. And this happened. And now this is what basketball is like today, right? So definitely going through it. So let's put that one on as a maybe. Okay, C. It states a problem and offers a solution. What's the problem? There's no problem. It's just telling us about the, basketball and the history. Compares 2 ideas? No, it's just talking about one, right? So our answer here is B. So as I told you earlier, we just read the part about women's basketball, an article, and we answered some questions. Now we're going to read another article, answer a few questions, and then answer questions about both of the articles together. So we're going to start with surveying. So Title 9. So Roman numeral, if it's just an X, that represents 10. However, there's an I before the X, which makes it 9. Okay, so Title 9. So let's do a survey. Title 9 of the Education Amendments. If in general, Title 9 requires colleges and high schools to offer equal opportunities, although probably best known for its application to sports. Okay, and that's the article. Okay, so which groups are excluded from the regulations of Title 9? Which action by a public school covered by Title 9 would be a violation? Okay, so let's read the article. Title 9 of the Education Amendments, part of federal law enacted by Congress on June 23, 1972, states, look at it, the whole rest of the paragraph there is the quote of what it states. No person in the United States shall, by the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. In general, Title IX requires colleges and high schools to offer equal opportunities, benefits, and services to females and males in sports, including scholarships, practice facilities, locker rooms, uniforms, publicity, and coaching. Schools are not required to offer identical sports for each sex or identical pay for coaches, but schools must offer equal sport and club opportunities for each sex. If a school offers the same sport to both sexes, has a boys and a girls track team, for example, the school is not required to allow a student to join a team of the opposite sex. Although probably best known for its application to sports, Title IX also covers employment practices, admissions, participations in school bands, clubs, and admittance to academic programs at covered institutions. However, Title IX regulations do not apply to organizations that have traditionally been limited to members of one sex, such as the Young Men's Christian Association, YMCA, or the Girl Scouts. Title IX also does not apply to private schools, provided they do not receive any money directly or indirectly from the federal government. Okay, so which groups are excluded? So we kind of just said that at the end, right? With the YMCA and Girl Scouts, right? Right in the last paragraph that you can't see because of my picture and the question. Okay, so certain organizations that exist for males or females only. Yeah, that's the answer. Okay, but let's just look at the other ones too. Private schools receiving federal funding. No, if a private school receives federal funding, then they have to follow Title IX. If they do not receive federal funding, then they don't have to follow it. Public high schools that enroll more males than females? No. If you have a high school that has 900 males and 100 females, you have to offer, according to Title IX, the same amount of opportunities. Guys, this is kind of like a social studies lesson too here, right? Okay, academic clubs at colleges that receive federal funding. Again, they're not excluded, right? If they receive federal funding, they have to follow Title IX. So the answer, certain organizations that exist for males or females only. It is interesting though, because this came about in 1972, and think about how things are a lot different 50 years later, right? I mean, Boy Scouts is open to boys and girls, right? Okay, but let's keep going. Which action by a public school covered by Title IX would be a violation? So violation means not so good, right? Offering no sports or clubs to any student, boy or girl. No, they have to offer equal, right? So it's not, they can offer nothing, right? But if they offer something, it needs to be equal. So that's not it. Purchasing separate uniforms for the girls and boys soccer teams. No, because they're boys and girls, they're providing uniforms for both of them. So that's not it, right? Offering unequal, bingo, that's the word, unequal sport opportunities to boys and girls. That's it. That's what it's all about, right? Let's look at D. Employing the same person as a coach for girls sport and an advisor for a boys club. Guys, it doesn't matter as long as it's equal. That's what it's about. Okay, so this one here is both of the articles, right? The women's basketball and also the Title IX to answer this question here. What problem in U.S. education was Title IX apparently intended to address? Guys, we kind of just answered this, right? Okay, so females and males attended separate schools. No, that's not it. It's not about them attending different schools. It's about together. If it's a boy, if it's a mixed gender school, they need to offer equal opportunities for boys and girls. Males and females had few opportunities to play high school sports, It's not about that, right? Females were not playing the same. It doesn't matter if it's the same sport, right? You might offer boys wrestling and girls volleyball. You just have to offer the same amount. That it needs to be, if you offer 5 options for girls, you need to offer 5 options for boys. So D, females and males were not given the same rights and privileges in schools. Yeah, so it's like, hey, why did these males have all these opportunities, but the females don't? That's what it was trying to address back in 1972. Okay, so we're again looking at the 2 articles together. So, what do the passages, women's basketball and Title IX, suggest about opportunities for students in education today? Women's opportunities are now better than they were in the past. Yeah, I mean, this is 1972, you guys. Gender equality was kind of a big thing, right? We want women to be treated equally as men. And so that essentially is what brought across this movement and then brought it ultimately to the Supreme Court. And this is what came out of it. So A is the answer, but let's look at the other ones. Men's opportunities in sports are lacking while women's opportunities in sports are expanding. No. The men had more options than women. Women have achieved many new high school opportunities, but still struggle with limited college opportunities. No. Men are taking advantage of fewer academic opportunities than they did in the past. Guys, these ones clearly are not the answers at all. So not everybody stayed until the end of the video, but you did, because I know that you're committed and you're going to get through this pretty fast. You are going to rock your GED, HiSET, or TASC test. I believe that you are. Thanks for staying till the end. Thanks for supporting my channel. You are a beautiful person and you're an important person, and I know that you'll be successful. So great job. Believe in yourself just like I believe in you. Peace.